Yeah.
In those days, the only isolation was putting the singer into a separate booth.
Okay.
It was all done live. Later on, in the 70s and 80s, then it was all overdubbed. Nothing was live.
Mm-hmm.
You would go in and everything had been done already, and all they wanted to do was put on brass. So it didn't matter. You put on the headphones and they play it to you, and you do it.
Right.
But in those days, in the 60s and even the 70s, it was live.
Did you ever have to deal with, bad arrangers, bad copyists?
Constantly.
Those things.
Constantly.
Yeah.
You had to make them sound good.
Mm-hmm.
There was one expression that Charlie Colello, who was one of the successful arrangers, used to use, and that was "make it work." You know, I said, "Well, Charlie, this is impractical for so make it work." You know,
Mm-hmm.
so you made it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might find something different to play that's not on the paper. That
There were even times, and many times, when we went into a date, and there might have been some sketched music, but certainly not an arrangement. Or there might have been no music, and they just said, "Look, we're doing this," and they play a little bit of the rhythm for us live, and we were to make up some horn fills. And I remember doing a Pepsi-Cola commercial that way, where the band was a successful rock and roll band that Pepsi decided they should do the next commercial because they were hot. And these guys had 3 or 4 solid days of studio time. I came in, my segment took about 8 hours. And we just sat there making up things and discarding things and keeping a note here and a chord there. And it was the most boring way to do it, but the money was good.
Yeah.
So you didn't mind.
I guess Pepsi had the money to
Pepsi
spend at the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, that's interesting.
But you want to make it work.
Yeah.
You want it to sound good. And Mel Davis, who's a wonderful trumpet player. You talk about milestones in my career. Jerry Mulligan was one, doing that band. Playing with Brookmeyer was a milestone. When I started doing really good studio work, and I was doing dates with Bernie Glow and Mel Davis, who were the top 2 trumpet players in New York City for many years, I felt, well, I've arrived. I'm doing things with these guys, and I'm able to kind of hold my own with them, Mel told me something one day that spun me completely around, and I'm so happy he did. After a certain point, when I realized I could play the trombone, and there was nothing out there that was going to scare me too much, music-wise, I started developing an attitude of, well, this is all beneath me, And we were doing a date, Mel and Bernie and I, we were doing a thing for RCA Camden. I think it was a rip-off of the Herb Alpert style. It was called Living Brass. And it was the Herb Alpert tunes done with studio brass, so that people could buy the record for $2 instead of $4, and they'd get the same music. In fact, they'd probably get it played better. And there was something that we were playing that was just terrible. And I remember looking at Mel saying, "Wah, wah, 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 wah," and I started doing a real... this is ridiculous. I mean, look at this garbage, Mel, during the break, he walks over and he puts his arm around my shoulders. He says, "Alan," he says, "we're here to sell it, not to buy it." And wow, did that ever change? That changed me right there on the spot. I thought, my God, yes, we're here to sell it, not to buy it. Here I'm sitting there like I'm buying it. And that just turned me completely around,
Yeah.
When you learn something, you learn it immediately, like a ton of bricks, and that was a ton of bricks at that time.
Wow. Very succinct. You put it. Wow.
Yeah.
I have to remember that one.
It was good. Well, I've told that to many people since, but
Yeah.
but Mel laid it on me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad he did.
Did you were you called upon to do much improvising and soloing? And,
Not a lot.
Yeah.
Not a lot. There are 2 or 3 records that are floating around that I have a little bit of improvisation on. I did playing with Mulligan's band at Birdland. We played opposite Dizzy Gillespie. We played opposite Art Blakey. We played opposite many very good jazz bands. As a matter of fact, it's funny, I went to school with Wayne Shorter. We both went to NYU. He was a half year behind me. And I'm playing here with Jerry Mulligan, and Wayne is playing with Art Blakey. In fact, I got Wayne to write an arrangement for Mulligan's big band, which he did, and Jerry played a thing called Mama G. Was one of the tunes that Jerry played with the band. But along with Wayne was Freddie Hubbard and also Curtis Fuller. And Curtis I loved. I just did an album of his called Cabin in the Sky right around that time when we did this particular Birdland job. And I had Brookmeyer and Willie Dennis there in the Mulligan band, and Curtis walking around listening to the band, and I had the nerve to stand up and play a blues solo on one of the tunes that Jerry had, because Jerry finally, sometimes he wouldn't show up until the first couple of tunes, and the band would just play something, and we'd share the solos. So I would stand up occasionally and play, and I remember at one point I stood up and played this blues thing. And, I thought, oh my God, this is horrible, but I have to get through the 24 bars or whatever it is. And after it was over, after the set was over, Curtis came over. He says, hey, man, it's very nice. And I thought, oh my God. Oh, you didn't have to say that. Me? So I can play. But compare, it's like you wear a sailor's hat, and, to your mother and father, you're a sailor, but to a sailor, you're not a sailor. You know what I mean? I can play jazz. To a jazz player, I'm not a jazz player.
Okay. What was the racial scene like in the studio work? And did it change?
Rock and roll was half black, half white for openers.